On that stretch of I-80, every trucker talks about the curves. But nobody mentions the detour that only shows up on the GPS after midnight. I only found out why it exists because I was the only one who turned back from that road that night. That week, I had already driven more than I should have. The company had closed some extra contracts and pushed them onto whoever accepted the night shift, and I've always been the type who prefers to earn a little more than argue about schedules. I left Elko carrying metal structures to a warehouse in Fallon. Nothing heavy, nothing too valuable, the kind of cargo that normally doesn't attract anyone's attention. The problem with that trip wasn't the cargo or the road, it was whoever decided to mess with the route after everyone went to sleep. The early morning hours in the Nevada desert have a strange way of playing tricks on your mind. The darkness always seems the same, the wind makes the same noise. The dashboard becomes your only fixed point. I was driving along I-80 at a steady pace, engine running smoothly, with no cars overtaking me or coming from the opposite direction. It was like driving inside an invisible tunnel, just me, the truck, and the white line under the headlights. It was precisely in this emptiness that the GPS decided to blink as if it had a will of its own. The screen went black for a few seconds, and when it came back on, a warning box appeared that I had never seen before. Emergency roadwork ahead. Alternative road available. Estimated savings. 14 minutes. What froze my mind wasn't the word roadwork. That's common. It was the negative time. I was already on the most direct route. It made no sense to save time by taking a secondary road. Even so, the route seemed official, well-designed with gentle curves and a perfect return to the main highway. Tired and wanting to finish my shift quickly, I turned in the direction the system instructed. The entrance to the bypass looked freshly constructed. Dark asphalt, impeccable white paint, no tire marks, no cracks, as if no one had ever used it before. There was no physical sign indicating roadworks, only the digital certainty of the device in front of me. As I advanced, the sound of the truck seemed more muffled, as if the air became heavier there. The night, which was already dark, seemed to swallow the horizon even further, leaving only the beam of the headlights and nothing else. After a few minutes on that strange road, I began to notice buildings springing up on either side. They weren't houses, they weren't gas stations, they weren't typical motels. They were rectangular metal blocks, some with sliding doors, others with large openings like garages. No signs, no lit windows, no small cars parked. Everything was too organized, too clean, for a place that was theoretically a construction site. It seemed less like a temporary detour and more like a place set up with a specific purpose. The GPS had lost all the names. It no longer showed road numbers, county names, or nearby cities. Just a white line on top of a gray void. The route instructed me to continue straight ahead for several kilometers, and then turn right at a point that wasn't yet illuminated. Meanwhile, the road narrowed, almost imperceptibly, as if someone had calculated the perfect width for trucks to pass through without much room to maneuver. That's when I saw the first details that gave away the kind of place I had landed in. To the left, lined up on a flat piece of ground, were at least 5 truck chassis. They weren't old scrap heaps left out in the open. Some looked freshly cut, with parts of the paint still gleaming under the light of my headlights. There were sanding marks in areas where plates and numbers would normally be. It was as if someone had erased entire vehicle identities there. As I processed that scene, I saw in my rearview mirror a pair of headlights appearing in the distance, approaching at a steady speed. It wasn't a small car. Judging by the size of the lights and the weight of the sound in the air, it was another truck. It approached until it was a comfortable distance behind me, neither too close nor too far. And then something happened that I will never forget. Without signaling, without hesitation, it turned into one of the large garages with the door open. As soon as the rear passed, the door began to descend on its own, as if someone were controlling it from a panel. In a few seconds, the truck disappeared from my sight. I kept driving, pretending everything was normal, but my mind was no longer on autopilot. The GPS blinked again and displayed a strange message. Speed incompatible with safe zone, adjusting route. The engine gave a slight hiccup, the kind you feel more in the vibration than the sound. Immediately, I turned off everything on the dashboard that could receive an external signal. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a system update. Someone was trying to tamper with my truck remotely. The cameras started appearing soon after. Small metal cylinders attached to makeshift posts, all pointed toward the road, all rotating slowly as I moved forward. There was no company logo, no municipal logo, nothing to suggest anything official. They were cold eyes working at night, recording every truck that entered. The route, which still directed me to turn right, seemed less a suggestion and more a disguised order. I ignored the instruction. I went straight when the GPS told me to turn. The screen quickly turned red and displayed route not followed, recalculating. But instead of recalculating, it froze for a few seconds, as if waiting for someone else to give the next command. I used those seconds to speed up a little, trying to put some distance between myself and the structures that were starting to repeat themselves on both sides. To the right, in a more open space, it was easier to see the scale of it all. It wasn't a makeshift dismantling operation, the kind you find in the back of an old workshop. It was an organized industrial operation. There were piles of large parts, precisely cut car bodies, areas separated by type of material. Entire trucks entered from one side and left reduced to reusable units, ready to be assembled in another part of the country with new documents. I knew this type of crime existed, but I had never seen the mechanism working so closely. It was at that point that the pickup truck appeared. It came from some dark side access I hadn't seen, pulling up behind me as if it had been waiting for me. Black, no license plate, with a light bar on the roof. No police markings, no company identification. Just that clean, silent truck bed, following me precisely. At a certain point, it activated a short siren, a dry sound that pierced the cabin and made the message clear. They wanted me to stop. I didn't stop. I held the truck steady, gripping the steering wheel tightly enough that my hands ached. The pickup truck tried to come from the left side, closing in on my bumper. Any distracted driver would have slowed down, pulled over, tried to figure out what was happening. But I'd already seen too many cars without license plates that night to trust any sign of authority there. Instead, I swerved the truck a few inches to the same side, forcing the pickup truck driver to back up to avoid being squeezed. The road began to incline slightly, as if leading me back to higher ground. Looking ahead, I could see a faint gleam cutting across the horizon. I recognized that kind of light. It was I-80, the main stretch. Being near it meant being near traffic, people, anything that could hinder those operating on that detour. Instinctively, I revved the engine a little harder. The pickup truck stayed behind, but without attempting to close the gap again. The GPS, which had been frozen, changed again. It erased the previous route and now only showed a large arrow telling me to reduce my speed. The message read, "Danger area. Slow down for your safety." I had already understood that the only risk there was obeying. Without taking my eyes off the road, I ignored the warning. I felt my arms heavy, my body rigid, as if every muscle knew that any slip-up could keep me trapped in that labyrinth. When I finally reached the point where the turnoff rejoined I-80, I felt something I hadn't felt driving in a long time. Genuine relief. The asphalt changed texture. The lanes became familiar. My eyes adjusted again to the feeling of spaciousness. As soon as the wheels returned to the main highway, the truck turned off its auxiliary lights and disappeared down an unnamed side exit, as if it had never been there. The GPS reloaded the original map. No mention of emergency roadwork, no alternate route, no history of the path I had just traveled. In the settings, there was no dashed line in the log, no record of anything. Officially, I had never left I-80. The technology I used every day to locate myself had been used against me that night. And worse, it had erased its own footprints afterward. I arrived in Fallon before dawn, parked in the depot yard, and got out with wobbly legs. I delivered the cargo, signed documents, and did the standard check as if my head were working on autopilot. Nobody asked anything different. Nobody noticed that I barely remembered the entire conversation. The world kept turning. Trucks came and went, while a stretch of road a few kilometers away transformed entire vehicles into nameless pieces. I could have called the police. I could have warned other drivers. I could have pressured the company to investigate what was happening in the area around kilometer marker 199. But the more I thought about the number of cameras, the precision of the detour, and how the system was able to interfere with the electronic module, the clearer it became that this wasn't the work of just a handful of thieves. It was people with access, resources, and protection at some level. People capable of making trucks and data disappear without leaving a visible trace. Since that night, I passed kilometer marker 199 with the GPS turned off. It doesn't matter if it's raining, foggy, or a clear sky. It doesn't matter if I'm tired or ahead of schedule. The main road is dangerous enough on its own. What lies beyond midnight on that invisible detour isn't a shortcut. It isn't help. It isn't a solution. It's just a reminder that for some people, a truck like mine is worth more disassembled in silence than driving whole down I-80. And I have no doubt that while I'm telling you this, there's another driver going alone in the dark, listening to the dashboard vibrate and looking at the same alternative route message appearing in the middle of the night, without imagining that his biggest mistake won't be a poorly executed turn, but trusting too much in a detour that doesn't exist on any map when the sun is high. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any more terrifying tales to come. Now, get ready for another journey down dark and mysterious roads. I was condemned by a blue dot on the screen, not by a police officer. On the trucking company's app, my truck appeared parked in the yard, and inside my trailer, a second marker appeared, motionless, as if someone had registered a presence where only sealed boxes existed. I hadn't even left the dock when it first appeared. The collection process was pure bureaucracy, clean manifest, standard weight, intermediate destination, no risk assessment. Such normalcy only serves to conceal an operation within the flow, using the procedure itself as a shield. The more routine the paperwork seems, the easier it is to blame the driver if something goes wrong later. The warehouse was off the main corridor, stained concrete, flickering lights, old cameras pointed nowhere. No one spoke to me. No one checked my face. They pushed pallets inside and finished the job as if closing a door and forgetting. It wasn't haste. It was a desire not to be part of the story. When the back door was closed, they applied the seal and gave me the number on a thin sheet of paper. I photographed it using the reflection, the way I've done ever since I learned that a number on paper is worthless without an image. The seal looked perfect, and yet it repulsed me, as if I were registering a signature that wasn't mine, and that I had no right to refuse. Repulsion turned to shock when I saw the same photo in my gallery, older with a different time, identical even to the shadow of my finger. I didn't remember taking that photo before, and I don't use cloud storage. The image was there like a file that had always existed, occupying space with the tranquility of someone who knows I couldn't prove where it came from. Seconds later, the app updated and the tow point reappeared. It didn't shake. It didn't drift. It remained fixed in an exact location, as if someone had installed a coordinate on my floor and called it a load. I zoomed in until the map turned into blocks, and even then the marker remained clear, insistent, too conscious to be a mistake. I started the engine, and the night revealed a sky that was too clear. No clouds, no noise. Everything dry and bright. Clear is bad, because clear creates certainty, and certainty makes you relax at the wrong time. I left the yard feeling that every headlight on the road was an open window for someone to watch me from afar. The radio didn't crackle, didn't search for stations, didn't give any sign of life. It was absolute silence, as if the cabin had been isolated from the rest of the world. Only the sound of the engine and the whistling of the wind in the rearview mirror. I tapped on the dashboard, changed frequencies, turned it off and on, and nothing changed, as if the sound had been removed from the air around me. The first hour was all asphalt and the feeling of being late for a meeting no one scheduled. The second point remained inside the trailer, and I avoided looking so as not to turn that into confirmation. When I did look, my stomach responded with a short tightening, as if my body knew before my head. A car appeared in my rearview mirror with its low beams and excessive discipline. It wasn't trying to overtake, it wasn't backing up. It just maintained the same distance, the same lane, the same angle, as if it were studying my pace. I adjusted my speed to test it, and it adjusted along with me without hesitation, as if the decision had been made before my move. I went to a large gas station, bright white lights, real cameras, enough people to drown out anything. I parked near other trucks so I wouldn't be isolated, and the car drove slowly, circled the yard and stopped at the far end, out of reach of the brightest lights. He wasn't trying to hide, he was just choosing the right spot to stay out of focus. I opened the app again and zoomed in until the map became a pixel grid. The tow point blinked at regular intervals, always in the same rhythm. GPS errors don't blink intentionally. It seemed like a signal delivered to me, as if I were forced to acknowledge an invisible rule and accept that there was a schedule. I went downstairs to check the seal. Intact, correct numbering, padlock in place. I had no formal reason to open anything, and I knew that opening something without reason creates suspicion where there is none. Even so, I touched the metal and felt a slight vibration, almost a recent warmth, as if someone had just touched it on the other side and left before I looked. I went back to the cabin and watched the car in the distance, waiting for some movement that would justify a decision. It didn't move. Whoever was there didn't need to move. It was the first time I understood that the real threat wasn't someone armed, but someone comfortable, someone who had time and control over the steps. I decided not to sleep. I can manage the tiredness. What terrified me was standing still and allowing time to be used against me. I returned to the highway and clung to the dashboard as if it were a lifeline. With each sign, I felt I was being guided by a logic that didn't depend on my own will. The GPS recalculated a detour without my request. I canceled it. It insisted. On the third attempt, the map froze and only showed a thick arrow pointing to the next exit, with no alternatives, no justification, as if someone had removed the option to choose. My phone didn't freeze like that, not with a full battery and a good signal. That was an order disguised as a failure. I took the exit because I understood that the argument with the screen wasn't about routes. It was about minutes, about getting me to a specific place at the right time. The car in the rearview mirror disappeared instantly, as if its presence was only necessary while I could turn back. The silence grew heavier, and I began to hear my own breathing as an inconvenient noise. The back road was dark and narrow, with no shoulder, no houses, no signs. The kind of place where a truck becomes an event. I drove slowly, feeling the weight of the load respond on long curves, and found myself checking the mirror every 5 seconds, not expecting to see the truck, but hoping to see anything that would prove I was still in control. The app marked a service zone that didn't exist in the real world, only on the map. It was a dirt road parallel to the highway, hidden by low bushes. I stopped at the exact spot and turned off the engine. The cabin cooled down quickly, and the second indicator stopped flashing and became continuous, as if it had reached the final stage of a process. I didn't get out. I waited with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the windshield as if it could warn me. The first sound came from the rear, a careful metallic snap, the kind that doesn't happen when someone breaks in, only when someone has access. Then, a low noise of a chain being handled patiently, without haste, without error. The truck tilted a millimeter, something only those who work with heavy loads notice. They didn't remove the boxes. They rearranged them. Anyone who works in cargo distribution knows exactly what they're looking for and how much time they can spend. My body registered each change as a warning, and I felt reduced to a stationary support while someone else worked on my behalf. On the screen, the trailer marker moved for the first time. It walked in short lines between the pallets, stopped, went back, stopped again. I watched the operation like a drawing without needing to see people. That was worse than seeing. Seeing allows you to react. Watching on a map left me immobile, stuck with evidence that no one would accept as evidence. When the marker returned to its initial position, I heard the door close, not a bang, but a click. Then, a small click, the sound of a seal being pressed. My perfect seal was now different, and I had no way of recording the before and after. I started the engine with the feeling of sealing something I didn't even recognize. Back on the highway, the GPS unlocked, and the original route reappeared, as if nothing had happened. The radio came back on its own with local news and normal advertising, the most offensive kind of normality imaginable. It seemed like a message. The operation was over. Now the world could go back to pretending everything was normal. The morning's delivery was clean, organized, and bureaucratic. They opened the documents, cut the seal, pulled out boxes without surprise, and stamped my papers without looking at me. Everything matched because the goal wasn't to fail at the conference. but to use the conference to legitimize it. I left with their signature, officially turning my night into something non-existent. The confirmation came at the next checkpoint, inside my own cabin. A laminated card on top of my change of clothes, with the seal number, and a smaller suffix, like a signature from whoever remade the seal without leaving a mark. At that same instant, the app's history showed that I'd been on that dirt road for 42 minutes. I remembered 15. Time had been stolen from within my perception, and the theft was the most disturbing part. 2 weeks later, under the trailer, held in place by a magnet, I found a cheap black module, just enough to create a point within my tracking system and push me to the right place at the right time. It didn't need to be sophisticated. It just needed to exist because the rest of the work was done by people and by routine. I removed it and put it in a bag, taking it away from the truck, believing that this would end everything. That same night, my cell phone received a notification with no sender. It wasn't a text, it wasn't a number, it wasn't a call. It was a single image taken from above, showing my truck in the pickup yard before I arrived, with the seal shining at the exact angle of the old photo. In the lower corner a time, EU058, the same minute I had left the yard on the night of the delivery. I deleted the image, cleared the history, uninstalled the app, restarted the device, changed the password, cut permissions, did everything someone does when they need to feel they still have choices. Even so, the feeling didn't change, because what kept me on that trip wasn't a tracker. It was the certainty that someone could put a dot inside their trailer and call it normal, and that the entire system would accept that normality as proof. Since then, when I see a load that's too clean, I understand that the danger isn't what's inside. It's how prepared the process is to pretend nothing happened. I keep driving, filling out paperwork, taking photos, keeping to the schedule, and trying not to think about what else might be marked on the map without me seeing it. Because the worst part wasn't stopping on that dirt road. It was getting back on the highway and realizing that to everyone else, I had never stopped. If you drive along NV 376 after 2 a.m., you'll notice a fixed orange light on the horizon. It's not a city, it's not a gas station, and it doesn't appear on any map. I parked nearby just to figure out what it was, and became a witness to something I should never have seen. I was driving down with the loaded Freightliner, returning from Tonopah heading south, trying to save time because I knew the traffic would get heavy later. That stretch was always too empty, too dry, with that silence that makes the engine seem louder than it actually is. I was looking at the dark asphalt and keeping the high beams on when the light appeared for the first time, stationary at the same point on the horizon, intense and constant as if someone had installed a spotlight in the middle of nowhere. I found it strange because I know that entire corridor. There are no active mines there, nor a transmission station. And the light wasn't blinking. It wasn't moving. It didn't make geographical sense. Even so, I kept driving, thinking it was just refraction or an illusion of the early morning. But the further I went, the more that orange color seemed like an indirect invitation to stop. The feeling was exactly that. Not curiosity, but a kind of silent warning saying that I needed to pay attention. When I passed the mile marker where I usually park to check the tie-downs, I noticed the light was brighter, as if I were right behind a low hill. Another strange thing, there was no shadow on the ground, even with that absurd brightness. It was as if it illuminated from afar but without touching the ground. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, got out, and felt the air was hotter than it should have been at that altitude. The night was cold, but in that direction it felt like I was near an industrial furnace. That's when I heard the first noise, something metallic and rhythmic, like a generator working underground. I stood still, trying to pinpoint the exact direction, but it came and went, always accompanied by a slight, almost imperceptible vibration in the ground. The orange light seemed to pulse without changing size, creating a sensation difficult to describe, as if it were being modulated by something I couldn't see. I walked a few meters ahead, just to make sure it wasn't a stretch of highway I'd forgotten. But when I climbed a small rise beside the shoulder, I saw something that froze my entire body. An improvised station, nameless, without signs, without any markings, positioned exactly where the map shows sand and rocks. It was a low, rectangular, metallic structure, with two dark containers aligned and a short, somewhat crooked tower, internally illuminated by that orange light. No emblem, no federal identification, nothing to explain why it existed. Two trucks were parked nearby, both without logos, without numbers, completely anonymous. Their headlights were off, their engines cold. This only told me one thing. They had been there for hours. I also noticed recent tire tracks going to and from the structure, but some came from trails that aren't on any map. It was as if only those who knew of the station's existence could reach it. I should have gone back to the truck. But before I could retreat, a metal door slid open, revealing the interior of the facility. The orange glow emanated from within, brighter than it had appeared from a distance. The light reflected off the floor, revealing silhouettes of large boxes, all identical, stacked as if they were sealed units of something I couldn't recognize. I saw men moving these boxes with exaggerated care, almost as if they couldn't tip them over for even a second. And then I noticed the detail that made me realize the magnitude of the risk I was in. The boxes were exactly the same as the ones that were attached to the trailer I was pulling that morning. The weight made sense. Their caution made sense. The only thing that didn't make sense was what my own shipper had told me hours earlier. Cargo of industrial equipment, no risk, no need for escort. Even then, that speech started to stink. Continuing to observe, I realized that the men inside were wearing ordinary clothes, didn't look like federal agents, and didn't have the demeanor of miners either. They worked quickly and in an organized manner, but without the discipline typical of official teams. The pattern was different. Constant flow, total priority on the box, and absolute silence. Each unit they moved was scanned by a handheld device, and when the green light came on, they marked something on a clipboard. Everything there was an illegal logistics operation. There was no other explanation. The vibration in the ground grew stronger for a few seconds. The orange light intensified, as if the generator had increased its load. Next to the tower was a wide pipe, buried in the sand, connected to a pipeline that led to a deep hole. That wasn't ventilation. It was transport. Something was being sucked up or sent through that underground system. And it was at that moment that I realized the biggest absurdity. The station wasn't the final destination of those boxes. It was just an intermediate, clandestine, completely isolated point where the contents were checked and redirected without leaving a trace. When I turned my eyes to the parked trucks, I noticed that one of them had been opened. The interior had been emptied. The truck bed was clean, without a trace, without dust. This meant they were using drivers without knowing it. Drivers like me. Someone would haul the load, leave it at the designated spot, and from there another group would take over and erase any trace. My shipper had given me incomplete coordinates. That's never a good sign. And then I understood. Maybe my final destination wasn't the cargo's actual destination. Maybe I was just another disposable link in the chain. I crouched down to avoid the light. The wind shifted, bringing a strong, metallic chemical smell, as if something were burning without emitting smoke. It didn't fit with mining or industrial equipment. It was starting to look like something destined for hidden laboratories or parallel operations that would never be audited. The station door opened again, and one of the men entered with a cylindrical container, which, when brought close to the orange light, displayed a different internal glow. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't electricity. It was something processed, something that required careful handling. My mind immediately associated it with the boxes in my truck. I just didn't know if it was the same contents or a variant. I decided to return to the truck immediately. This wasn't the kind of thing I could fully understand, but it was exactly the kind of thing that could kill me just by being near it. I walked around carefully, trying to calculate the right moment to leave without making a sound. But when I pulled over to the side of the road, I noticed something that made everything even worse. One of the SUVs without license plates was parked next to my truck. The headlights were off. The door was ajar. Someone had tampered with my locks. That confirmed that I wasn't just observing too much. I had already been included in the equation. The second SUV appeared a few meters behind me, blocking my escape route. No sirens, no warnings, no uniforms. Just absolute silence, as if surrounding me was routine procedure. They weren't after me. They were after what was inside my truck. I was just collateral damage. The orange light behind me grew even brighter, making it clear that some phase of the operation was beginning. Whatever was happening there, I couldn't be a part of it, not even as an unwitting witness. The man in the first SUV opened the door completely. He didn't run, didn't show any hurry, didn't make any sign. He just stood there looking straight at the truck, as if he already knew I was coming. His posture made it clear that my presence had been detected long before I noticed anything. I made my decision right there. It didn't matter what was in the cargo. It didn't matter who those men were. It didn't matter what would happen to the freight. I threw myself behind the truck, ran along the side, and advanced into the low brush, heading in the opposite direction of the light. I knew they wouldn't find me easily in the total darkness of that desert. My only goal was to gain distance before they realized I had fled on foot. I ran until I was out of breath, keeping the station out of my field of vision. The heat from the orange light diminished as I moved away, but the feeling of danger remained locked in my chest. I crossed a gravel area, passed a fallen fence, and headed towards the parallel highway that connects the 376 to the 6, trying to remember every curve of that region. When I finally got a signal, I was already far enough away that my legs were trembling. I called a trusted contact in the industry, someone who knows when to keep quiet. He didn't ask me anything besides my location. He just told me to get out of that area for a few days. I never went back to NV 376 after 2 a.m. again. To this day, when I pass through Nevada, I avoid any stretch where that orange color might appear on the horizon. And every time I see an anonymous truck, with no logo, no registration, driving too late, I remember the night I discovered that there are nameless stations that only operate when nobody is looking. I looked,